everybody for coming. Let's get started and talk about some SaaS integrations. So who do we have here? My name is Christina. Some of you guys already know me. I'm looking at the attendees and I recognize some names there, but I'm the CEO here at Pandium and also the co-founder of the SaaS Ecosystem Alliance. For context, I've been working in the integration space for over 15 years, so really followed the sort of transition from on-prem, like old school technology, all the way through now to seeing small startups really care about integrations as a part of their ecosystem. And I've also got Rico, one of our senior software engineers here. Rico, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure thing. Name's Rico. I've been, I guess, in the same integration space, but writing them for almost 7 years, and 4.5 of those years have been here at Pandium.
Love to see it, Rico. Cool. So let's talk about what we're going to be covering today. So we have an agenda, but also we want this to be collaborative. So if anybody has questions, we have time at the end, about 5-10 minutes at the end to cover any audience questions. We can also obviously take that back to Slack if we don't get to cover everything. But feel free to either chat questions or use the Q&A functionality in Zoom, and we'll get to as many as we can. So what are we covering today? First, we're going to define an integration. So what is an integration? What's the difference between a native integration and a third-party integration? We'll talk about integration strategy, build versus buy, what kind of tools should you use, the life cycle of an integration, getting started, and also getting ahead of any gotchas that we might have. But first, why should you care about any of this? In my opinion, well, if you're here, you clearly have something to do with integrations generally. We had a lot of partner folks registered for this, BDRs. So you guys probably are looking to either retain more customers or sign more customers, and know that integrations and ecosystems are a great way to do that. And the sort of foundation of a technology partnership is going to be that integration. So that is why I think you should care about it. Rico, what do you think?
Well, if you're asking an engineer why you should care about this, it's how you can write one efficiently and not take, a year or 6 months. Get some tips on how to get started.
Yes, let's do it. All right. So first, Rico, what are SaaS integrations?
What are SaaS integrations? Well, first, what are integrations? I think all of you already know, simply connecting either two or more than two systems together, moving data between them, and probably transforming them in very weird ways. The SaaS product integrations, I would say, they're designed to work with many products and services without you having to move data manually or having to toggle through multiple logins and doing that by hand.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and folks, again, who've heard me on other panels may have heard this before, but to look at the transition of technology from this idea of like a monolith and every SaaS company, every software product was going to be perfect at everything and build all the things. What we see now is that point solutions are really like taking over, and that means that this interoperability is even more important as you guys focus at your companies with on what you guys do really, really well. You can bring on partners to help fill some of the gaps. And Rico, what do you think about native integrations versus third party?
Yeah, so this one's interesting. We had a little bit of a debate with my colleagues. What is native? But I think what we ended up agreeing on is that when there are two parties involved in an integration and one of them owns the system or the API, that's what we consider native, because you have the ability to communicate with the members who develop that API. You can request more personalized support instead of having access to possibly outdated API docs.
No such thing as outdated API docs.
Listen.
They're all totally up to date. I'll also say that having a native experience allows your customers to have one of either you or your partner supporting that integration. So they're not, off calling some third-party company to try to get support. And some additional benefits of having what we call native integrations or integrations that you or your partners built are around your ability to do tracking, see adoption metrics. Like if you send your customers to an external third party, you may miss out on usage patterns, if folks are using it at all, et cetera. So it's our feeling and opinion that the best partnership relationships and ecosystems are built with native interoperability versus something like a Zapier et al., which does have its place for the sort of long tail of integrations that you're not going to build in-house.
Yeah. We've also had occurrences where we requested like a partner to update their API to support a very custom business case, and sometimes they pull through, and it makes these kinds of those unique cases possible.
100%, yeah. And if the customer that wants this functionality has enough sort of sway within an organization or is a big enough customer, it's usually worth it to make those changes. And if you are sending that person somewhere else, you kind of are losing the ability, number one, to even know that that request took place. And maybe, you as an organization don't have a really close direct relationship with that dev shop or that other tool.
Yep.
Cool. So what are some key considerations for your integration strategy? And I like that you guys put a SpongeBob meme in here. I have never seen SpongeBob, but everyone else at the company has, so that's apt. Cool. So there's three primary ways, paths that you can go down, in our opinion, broad strokes, when it comes to your integration strategy. So one is going to be your build in-house, so do everything yourself. The middle road there sort of is going to be a low code workflow management tool or a unified API. And then obviously we've got something that's more developer focused, like we call Yes Code, but a platform like Pandium. There's others that are powered by actual code, and can accelerate your delivery of these integrations. So there's pros and cons to all of these things, but really the way that we think about it is the complexity of these integrations. So how flexible do they have to be? What do they need to do? Is it something that's going to be beyond just a really simple if then? And also the sort of priority of it and how it fits into your product roadmap. So if you are an integration platform as a product, you probably want to build all that stuff in-house. But most companies, that's not going to be really core to the sort of IP and the product that they're building, even though it may be really important for growth of that product. So, building in-house has unlimited flexibility. You could do anything that your developers are able to do, but obviously that comes at a cost, right? It takes a really long time. There's going to be maintenance involved. And I think I can speak for myself in saying that I've worked at a lot of places that start down that road. And then when they want to accelerate delivery or really use this ecosystem play as a revenue lever, they don't really have all of the support internally to keep those things running, because a lot of engineers, Rico not included, don't want to work on the integration stuff. They want to work on your core kind of IP. So there's pros and cons there. The low code sort of workflow management tools, that's going to be something that looks kind of like a Zapier or a Tray. There's a lot of different ones. Can accelerate integration delivery if those integrations are relatively simple. So if you think about a workflow, if the workflow is like a straight line, if this thing happens, then this other thing happens, those tools can be great. And there are use cases that are definitely that's appropriate for, but there is going to be some limitations on the ability for you to have flexibility. We always say, I think almost all of our customers and companies that we work with have presence on Zapier. They are going to just have coverage that you're never going to have internally. So I think it's a great option. And then if you want to kind of go down the middle road here, you could use a more modern integration platform where you get to have access to the flexibility that you would have if you built in-house, but you're not having to do all of the sort of infrastructure legwork of hosting all these things. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of the elements that go into this. But that's, when the integration infrastructure is not core to your business product itself, and your business needs are slightly more complex than what a no-code platform could potentially offer.
Christina, so like way back, I used to work for a company where Christina was also managing me, and they sent me out to a Dell Boomi course. So we could, because the company used Boomi, and I remember that almost every ticket that came in, this is my first job out of college, was so custom that none of the shapes in Boomi were working out for me. So I ended up having to drag that custom shape to do that custom business logic, and I ended up having to write code anyway. So just an interesting comparison.
That is a pattern that we see. Again, and that at that company, the needs were relatively complex, and the integrations were powering workflows that were like really integral to the product. Like, hey, this order is not going to get shipped if we don't get them between these two systems. So, yeah, using code is a good way to handle a lot of those things. And let's just briefly talk about the life cycle of an integration. So I think a lot of companies, when they're starting down their integration journey, or even when they're kind of mid-range, these apps and integrations are really seen as like a Band-Aid. Like, hey, we have a customer that's been really like loud about wanting this integration. We just need to get something done. Or, hey, our partnership team is like complaining they really want to bring on this partner, or we want to close a new deal. So we just need to get something up and running. And they're not really treated oftentimes like products, which is how your customers think about these native apps, right? Like they're thinking about these integrations as being something that, whether or not you actually did build it, you as a company at least are recommending something, and then, they want you to support it. So we say, treat these apps like you would treat any product, right? And there's a life cycle for that. So you have development, which is obviously building the app, which feeds into design. Implementation is going to be actually onboarding your customers, training your team. Support is super important. They are going to be the ones that are talking to your users. Hopefully you have a really tight feedback loop there. And then the most important one, in my opinion, is this modification. So iterating your way to success. And if you have the proper sort of processes and tooling, you can get to a place where the integration is not just one and done. You're able to then continue to build on the functionality to have something that suits the needs of your customers and the requirements of your partners over time. So we never want to be delaying launches because of edge cases. And Rico will talk in a minute about the importance of having beta customers and things like that. But it's our philosophy that you should get your broad strokes and launch, and then see how people are going to use the app. And get that feedback as quickly as possible so you can iterate your way to the solution that your customers want. All right. Rico, you want to talk about getting started?
Yeah. So how do we get started with an integration, and comparing with or without a developer-friendly platform? The first thing we always look at, or, I'm still writing integrations to this day, and so do my coworkers, we always start with authentication first, because if you can't auth these systems, you can't do anything. And in my experience, we find lots of really weird auth, even though we have OAuth 1 and OAuth 2, they're not always implemented the right way. We've seen P12 file uploading as well. Those aren't that fun, but how do you get there? The second part of this is you kind of want to think about hosting. Where are you going to host these syncs, these runs? Is it going to be on GCP or AWS, or some server rack that's in my basement that I promise is always have like 100% uptime? And then you want to think about logging and monitoring, and most importantly, alerting. Like, what happens if your run fails? What if some of these requests fail, or if the system you're getting from or posting from is down? How do you get that information quickly so you can act on it or report to your users and customers? The last thing here that's also important is a UI. If you're writing an integration, there's going to be more than just one user or partner running this integration. And most of the time, they're going to be using it in different ways. For example, a configuration that I'll bring up is you have the order sync, where you're syncing orders from an e-commerce platform to somewhere else, maybe your fulfillment center. You also sync customers and tracking information. What if those are configurable? You can turn them on, turn them off. If your users can control them, that frees up time from your customer success managers from having to log into some dashboard and updating it themselves. So in this case, a customer can log in, maybe if there's a UI, and toggle those things. These can get pretty complicated. These could be users mapping their own fields. Maybe there's custom fields. But what this allows is kind of the power to have a more generic integration that is configurable from a front end. That way, like an engineer doesn't always have to go in the code and have different kinds of releases for every single user. Then you can kind of iterate on this far faster.
Yeah, just to add on to what you were saying, I think in the logging and monitoring, it's really awesome for an engineer to be able to see that something's wrong. But the next level Galaxy brain is for the customer support team to also be able to have a place to go when a customer calls and says, hey, I don't see that invoice in QuickBooks. The amount of times that I've seen that, maybe someone like Rico can easily grab that from a database. But a CS person has to make a ticket, has to wait for it to be prioritized. And, 3 days later, when someone's looking at it, the issue is already self-resolved. So thinking about the future of where you want this ecosystem to go, like where you have thousands or hundreds of your customers using these things, can really start to kind of design something that's a little more robust than just, the data moving from one system to another.
Yeah, I agree. And, you bring up a great point. Like if you were building this in-house, I think one of the solutions is to kind of post these events to like a Datadog or something and manage that there. But then somebody has to learn how to use Datadog. You have to learn how to post those events and then set up those alertings in Datadog. With a developer-friendly platform, you can either use the platform's logging solution, or you can still post to your own Datadog or APM management and have your own separate alerting too. So there's a lot of flexibility there.
Absolutely. And I'll go just back to authentication too. If you have access to an environment, before you even try to start messing with the auth, just see if the credentials work. Definitely worked at places where there's a whole lot of like development that's happening. And then you find out when you go to test it that like logging in through the login web, the web UI, your creds are broken. And you thought it was the auth the whole time. So yeah, first things first, when you get those credentials, just go to the website, go to login and see if they work. It'll save you a lot of headaches. Cool. What are some other best practices to get ahead of issues, Rico?
Yeah, so these are for my project managers, my engineers that are writing integrations. Like I always recommend starting with architecting your project and not always diving to the code first, even though it makes you feel like you might get it done faster. Have a spec of your flows. Are you syncing orders, syncing tracking? Are you syncing tickets? It could be anything, inventory. And make sure you know and segment them differently, because I recommend writing your integrations in a modular way. That way, when you do implement your configurations, you can easily toggle them on and off. And for me, since I'm writing mostly in code, they're almost as simple as having just if conditions. If the user has toggled your sync orders, run this. Have some user stories so you know that what you're writing is actually what the business solution is. We've had some cases where you implement quite the wrong thing and you find out it's the wrong endpoint or the wrong mapping, which follows up to data mapping too. I always start with having the mapping first, so you know which endpoints you're going to have to grab. That way you can investigate the API docs. Is it even possible to fetch inventory from products? I'm not sure yet, because some of these e-commerce platforms, they keep those things in different locations and they may not tie together properly. And then the second part here is, as Christina mentioned, like you should have some users ready to go to do beta testing before you even start the integration. I would say, reach out to your partnership team, see if there's anyone like willing to beta test this product, this new integration, because when you're done, you're going to want to have someone test it, because those are the people that ultimately have some of the best feedback for you. That way you have a certain cycle right after where you can make some slight smaller changes that better fit that business case.
Yeah, 100%. And I'll add on to that I actually find that a lot of customers, like end customers, are really flattered to be a part of that process, to like be able to have feedback and, kind of change and shape the way that these apps work. Yeah, I found that if you ask your customer base, and you guys, the partnership folks on the call and the biz dev folks probably like have this sort of bench of customers in mind, but they get kind of excited being able to like use something new. And as Rico said, they are going to have all the weird data. They're going to actually know how they want these two systems to work together. And to mention sandbox access, sometimes there are systems that, as a partner, you're not actually able to get a really good like developer sandbox environment. Maybe you can get one, but it doesn't have any data in it, which makes it like sort of useless, or you can't get one at all. Partnering with your beta customers, they may be able to provide you with their sandbox environment, and then you can do some development work with them that way, maybe for like a discount of some sort on your licenses, or maybe not. They might be willing to just offer it up.
Yeah, we always get feedback from beta customers. I think none of them are saying it's 100% perfect. So we get great feedback and we iterate on that before like a full release.
100%. A few more best practices.
Yes. So this one one of these is about API constraints, and you don't generally see this until you are running your integration in production, where somebody has 300,000 products back from 6 months ago, and you find that your integration can't keep up with either the API rate limits or even your platform's rate limits, which generally I think even third-party integration platforms do have a runtime limit. And so if you get ahead of this and try to look for the rate limits in the documentation, you can try to implement, concurrency first, instead of discovering it later and having to try and implement concurrency over your existing code. So my recommendation here is plan ahead of time with certain constraints that you might see. And tools. So I think we mentioned this before. No, we did. So I recommend using Postman. And I think in this day and age, almost everybody uses Postman. And it's not just for engineers too. I think it's a great way for project managers to get access to the data models. Like, what do the orders look like? What do the products look like? Like I always say the API docs aren't always the truth, but Postman is the truth. Get those objects, map them based on the Postman returned requests.
Yes, they will often, in this fast-paced environment of software development these days, API docs are not always updated. Sometimes things come back looking a little bit different than what you expect. And also to Rico's point about the rate limits and the runtime limits, if you are able to do like capacity testing, that is awesome. If you can get like sample data sets together in your own system at really high volume, so then prior to launch, you guys can actually run some of those tests, get ahead of it, as Rico said, see how the partner system performs under really high load. It's not even necessarily the integration's fault. It could just be that, there's inefficiencies in the APIs on either side, which can slow things down. So good to know what those limitations are going in, so that you can either express those to the customers, talk to the partner, potentially have them put in a fix, and design your app accordingly.
Yeah, you don't want to discover those on Black Friday in production. Those aren't fun.
No, not fun. I think we may be actually almost out of time. So maybe we'll just leave it here. If anyone does have any additional questions, we'll give you a minute, 90 seconds of your life back. If anyone has any questions, SaaS Ecosystem Alliance, if you're not a member, please go to saasecosystemalliance.com and you can register to be a member. It's a free group. I think we've got like 1,300 plus folks in there now, spanning all different kinds of things with technology partnerships. So we're looking at engineers, product people, obviously folks in biz dev and partnerships. So all kinds of different folks in there that are always willing to lend a hand. And if you guys ever want to learn more about Pandium, obviously you can check out pandium.com.